Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we are taking a look at StarDrive 2 and comparing it to Star Ruler 2. Both of these games came out at the same time for, well, basically early access. Even though I think StarDrive 2 is technically not in early access, even though they are continuing to work on it. In fact, for the sale recently, they just came out with a whole new update that had a lot of new items to it. Both of these retail for roughly around $25. So it's a fair price either way. The first initial thing that you're going to look at when you're comparing them, deciding which one you want to get if you're not able to get both, is you're going to look and decide whether you want a game you can play with multiple players or a game you play on your own. And of course, StarDrive 2, it has no multiplayer, so it's going to have to be a single player experience. So that might just rule it out altogether for you right there. Now, assuming that doesn't, we'll go ahead and take a look here. What you have here is your 9 races. You can customize them, you can make custom names for it, but it's always going to be the default race you pick. So, for example, we'll go with the human one here, or we'll go with the Vulpers, which are kind of Klingon-ish, basically. We'll go ahead and go with them, and actually we'll go back and show you the custom options here. Now, the race customization is a lot more advanced in StarDrive than it is in Star Ruler. Of course, Star Ruler only just started coming out with that, and they are in early development, to be fair, but since they're pretty much the same genre, came out at the same time, same general price, we're doing a comparison here. So, what we have is the basic plus and minus pros and cons options that you have. Everything from, well, industry, farming, population, to pollution, to espionage. And by the way, the espionage system is really well done in StarDrive. It's definitely a good recommendation there, just for the amount of options you have. You have political options, you have espionage options, military options, and of course you can blockade planets or other options as well. You can even enslave races. There's races in there that you can raise to sentience, which is interesting. One I've done a couple times was the elephants in the game. Is actually basically you come up with a telepathic link device that you graft onto elephants, and they become sentient species that is basically able to help and live and prosper with you. And another one is actually found space dinosaurs and grafted Gatling guns to their head, and they fought for me. They served as ground troops. That was pretty interesting. They have a lot of pop culture references in this game, and StarDrive, that is, of course, and it's quite humorous. A lot of the heroes in the game are based around pop culture, at least sci-fi pop culture anyways, so you'll have some good times with that. And they even have a galactic news network, which is amusing for the first few times you go through it, but of course you can actually disable that in the settings. Now, what we're looking at here is where the StarDrive 2 falls short. Unfortunately, Star Ruler just really overtakes it in the map design and basically setting up your opponent list. For example, you cannot have, look at the opponent screen, you cannot have any opponents of the same race as you. So you're always going to be stuck with up to that maximum of 9 species total. The difficulty, normal, is actually fairly competently challenging. I would definitely go higher up for more experienced players once you get the hang of the game. And of course, I haven't even tried it on Brutal as yet. The big drawback is in the map/match design. You don't have much options there, and what you do, it's really hindered by the way the game sets itself up. For example, you'll have these wormholes that will take you across the map constantly both ways, and you will always find at least 1 or 2 that will lead you from your core worlds directly to the enemy's core worlds, or one of the other factions' core worlds, basically. And it's always going to end up being where you have to leave a standing fleet there, which is going to have to be a very large fleet, and you're not going to have much else that you can send anywhere else, because now you have to have this huge fleet standing by to counter any invasion, of course, unless you happen to be able to politically maneuver yourself into a situation where they won't attack you, which for some of these races it's almost near impossible to do. Go ahead and start the game here. You've got an interesting little story bit for each race, and they all pretty much start out very much the same here. Your worlds are going to be different. Sometimes they're spawned in with only 2 planets, counting this one you start with. Sometimes more, like this. You always start out with a frigate and a colony ship so you can take over another planet right away. The colonization options are a lot better for Star Ruler in that regards because you don't have to build colony ships. Your populace will basically just take care of that, so you're not micromanaging an entire galactic empire here. Of course, you are having to do that in StarDrive. Your population you can actually distribute around freely, and depending on which racial traits you've taken, they will give you better bonuses in different fields. So that is an interesting take on it, and that allows you to force your population basically to work on what you want. So you can work on research, you can work on production, you can work on pretty much anything really. Food, of course, is basically how you're going to get most of your income. The more food you produce, the more income you'll get for the planet. You'll get, you can see here the world. You don't actually select where to build things, they just stack up until it fills all the way up. You can scrap it as it says there, left click the scrap and get money back. But you'll also get free buildings based on what you're doing. So say if I queue up 10 freighters and I just start producing 10 freighters back to back to back, I'm going to get a planet structure that will give me a discount on freighters. And of course, if I build battleships or cruisers back to back to back, I'm going to get a planet building that's going to give me a +1 experience level to any capital ship of a frigate size or larger. You also have your garrison troops here as well, which you can upgrade, and this is something that Star Ruler completely lacks, is any kind of planet or ship-to-ship combat, which is unfortunate because it's a great system. And while this one is turn-based and kind of feels a bit tacked on, it's really just, it's a really good system to go with, basically. You get fairly fast combat and you feel the results, you feel a bit more engrossed in it. And of course you can load your troops up onto freighters. You do have to have freighters to be able to load your troops up. And basically your freighters have no upkeep that I can tell of. I've had up to 100 freighters and haven't seen any difference in my income before. But it tells you a breakdown of what your freighters are doing. Food haulers, if you have a +1 or more food on one planet and the other planets don't have food production or are lacking in food production, a freighter will automatically start hauling food to that planet to keep the planet's population growing and keep them from starving. And of course it'll add as many freighters as it needs for that. Passenger transports as well, and troop transports, obviously, as we just dictated, are carrying your troops. Trade transports will automatically trade your goods between other empires that you have trade rights with. And of course, well, total freighters. Now, what we have, we're going to take a look here. You have a limit of 8 ships that you can actively roster to build, but you can have as many different types as you want, and you can select which ones you want to add where. And that basically, it's just, I don't know why they don't just have a whole list that you can expand on based on the ship size, but this is how they did it, and it's not a bad system. There's no real disadvantage to it other than once in a while having to change your roster to an updated version. We'll take a look at the ship design here, because this is where they definitely differ majorly. Okay, as you see here, we have 5 different ship types, ship sizes for the race. They're unique for each race, and each one has a different configuration. So you'll have to come up with a configuration to match each race, basically. So, for example, we'll take a look at the cruiser here. Alright, so you have your 5 different facings and your core setting. Your different items do, of course, different things depending on which facing they're in. So, for example, we go in, select rockets, select spinal, put it here on the nose. That shows you the arc that it's aiming at, and of course you have your upgrade options down here. You can extend that arc. See how that just extends to either side. So basically any ship all the way over here can get hit by it, over here, and so on. And of course with spinal ones, put them up here on the sides. They will face forward as well with the same exact radius. So we go ahead and load this up with the missiles. And all of those are forward and side facing, basically. So the rear is basically our weak point at that point. Now there's also turrets, which generally have a better arc to begin with. But once you expand to arc for either one or have the same one, the turrets are basically smaller missiles that fire in salvos, and spinals are kind of large, like tomahawk-like missiles, and of course your minis are just miniature rockets that fire only off to the side. And you'll see a similar system here in laser cannon, so dual laser cannon. We can put one up here because it's huge. Turret one we can put over here. Spinals, they face forward, of course, and your point defense will only face off to the side. Now, it's a lot more limiting than Star Ruler 2 is, but not in a bad way, believe it or not. I actually prefer this in the sense that every ship's design options fit the exact model for the ship. While in Star Ruler 2, you have a sandbox mode where you can create a ship however you want, and they just stack a deco, basically, of a ship model on there. So it looks neat and all that, but it doesn't really give you that visceral feel of trying to come up with a more effective design for a ship with working within the limitations of the chassis. And that's what you really get here, and I actually do prefer that. Basically, there's 3 methods I've got so far for producing ships, or combat ships rather. The first, of course, is simply your forward-facing weapons, as we've done initially here, and basically just stack up forward-facing weapons either on the front or on the sides, and you just use that as your method of attack. Of course, you can do broadside for either side, or you can do one single broadside and everything else is just support. And both of those are very viable options. The advantage to using 2 broadsides is that both broadsides will fire independently. So, when you're targeting a ship, it's going to line up one broadside. I believe it's always the right side, I want to say offhand. So it's always going to line up the right side broadside. And that basically means that it's always going to rotate around with the ships on the right. And that means any ships that it's fighting that are faster, they're doing strafing runs, come by, they take a full broadside, and they're going back to the other side, they get hit by another broadside from over here. And they take that in the tail. The damage is directional on it. Let's go ahead and load up another design I've done previously, a working design from previous games. This here uses shields, which is a tech you'll unlock, guess you could say probably midway through the game. The shields, they work kind of uniquely. You put them on the facing over here on the right, and it'll only cover that right side. The left side, forward and rear, same thing. But you put them in the center, they'll cover the whole ship. It doesn't give them any extra health or drain any extra power. It's the same health regardless of where you put it, but that shield is exactly covering either a side, or a facing rather, or the entire ship, which means it's taking damage from hits from any side. Now, this design here I found very effective for the Volfer. It's just the 3 shield gens in the center, of course, and then energy weapons on either side, and support items. The cockpit reduces your CP and CP cost per ship, which command points basically, so you have a limit on how many ships you can have out based on your command points. Later in the game, you'll have 2 techs that you can research endlessly. One of those techs gives you +2 CP, so you can just continue to research that over and over again and just get your CP higher up so you can build larger and larger fleets. The command cockpit here does give a damage bonus, sensor range as well. It's really a good item to have. There's also a basic engineering item, which I obviously don't have unlocked because this is a new game, that really helps with your energy use for energy weapons. Definitely recommended for that. Of course, it wouldn't really fit on this particular design. Basically, this design here, it's a very good workhorse. It fares well against most anything, and it's not overly cost, or it doesn't really cost over that much. You'll have here on your right, let's take a look at our behaviors. These are hold position and keep moving. The difference between that is very obvious. Keep moving means that if we're circling, or if we come up to an enemy ship and we're attacking with a broadside, we are going to continue to rotate around that ship and keep hitting it for the broadside. Hold position means we stop and just shoot blows back to back. Obviously you want to keep moving in most situations because, well, moving targets are harder to hit and you can actually move out of the way of fire. Which also means that shots fired will still hit ships that fly into them. Now this, we need to change that anyways for that design. Alright, so frontal and broadside are the target facings. Obviously that means if it's going to face the front towards the target or the broadside. And it's always been the right broadside for me, so I guess that is what the game chooses by default. So basically that just matches where you put your guns and where your arcs are extended to. So if we extend these arcs to target forward, we'd actually probably want to do frontal because that would just mean everything would just fire straight at it. And of course, this particular design is set up so we can fire both broadsides infinitely. Energy weapons and solid weapons, we'll call them, I guess. because it's not just slug throwers, it's also missile launchers require ordnance, and energy weapons require, well, energy, of course, which you'll have listed here. It tells you the amount of seconds until it is drained. Ordnance cannot be regenerated in the field without a advanced technology upgrade, which generates ordnance per second, and then along with it there's another upgrade that will teleport ordnance from one ship to another. So in theory what you could do is make a supply ship that is just heavily armored, has no real weapons, and use that to transport ordnance to other ships, and that would just keep them all firing, and you wouldn't have to worry about loading them up with a large amount of ordnance. Frankly, I just prefer energy weapons because it's more space effective, and they're very effective on shields. Obviously, if we cut out this power generator here, it goes from infinite to 0 seconds. So that means that once we fire these broadsides, our energy is depleted. So we'll go back and throw that on there. And we've got 1 second there to fire all weapons because this is a much lower end power generator. Alright, so that pretty much gives you the basic idea of the ship designs. And I definitely, as I said, I definitely prefer StarDrive 2 ship design system over Star Ruler, even though it's limiting, but it's limiting in all the right ways. Now, you zoom out here, our map is really very small, and you'll have a lot of these little events here, unexplored anomalies, which will give you extra text to research, and they'll have different items you can purchase. You'll find planets that have subspecies or species that even retired from the galactic race, as I believe they call it, that will sell you things or hire themselves out as mercenaries or just repair and resupply your fleets. I think this one's got an ancient shipyard on it. And of course, the planets have different options or different benefits as well. It tells you when you highlight over it what the initial production options are. So obviously this one would be a good one to start with because it's going to give us food as well. This one not so much because we'd have to have a freighter fleet to go there. Your space combat, we'll go ahead and see if we can find some space combat here. It's not really going to matter because we're not going to play the game through here. Confirm that. Take a look at this anomaly, see what it is. Okay. This one is fairly common. In fact, I've seen it in every game. It's basically a ground once we have to send troops there with a freighter to invade and basically fight our way through the ship. So we should be able to find some space combat real soon here and get our tails kicked, basically. Because there should be pirate vessels, since we set that fairly high up. And here is the Galactic News Network, the initial one. They'll do a racial profile introduction to all the races, whether you find them or not, periodically, so you'll get an idea of who you're going up against. The overall graphics here for StarDrive are much better than they are for Star Ruler currently. Which, if that's a big thing for you, then definitely StarDrive is definitely the stronger game for that. And, oh, look, got another one. The turn-based system here for the main game, I guess you could call it, is interesting. It's a nice kind of Civilization-esque take on it, which I guess really just falls in line with the research and everything. Alright, here we go. Now we'll be able to show you the combat. So you can auto do it or you can fight. Depending on your ship designs, you might want to just auto because it'll probably do better than you in most cases. Unfortunately, with the blaster cruiser design that I showed you, I have found that manually fighting it is actually the better option. Now, you can choose where your ships deploy within your deployment zone. And of course you can issue initial orders, and the engagement range for this is basically none. But you can see how the engagement range changes. Unfortunately, you do have to select the individual ships to change engagement range and activate different items, or different skills rather, regardless if they're the same type of ship. That is definitely a drawback for it, but I'm sure they will fix that out as the game goes on. Any moment now, we should be in range to get shot at here. I believe our ship is technically unarmed, that's why it has no range. It should show red bars indicating where the weapon's lethality is. And there you go. It's a very simple combat system. It's fun. It's definitely a lot more fun than Star Ruler's combat system, really. So the combat system is definitely better in StarDrive. It's because it's more player intuitive. And of course you can set those basic designs for your ships and how they operate in combat, which is a nice feature. Of course, the operational behaviors, there's more choices for that in Star Ruler. And of course, we've touched on that in previous videos about ship design and how it really makes a difference based on how your ships are designed and how they're designed to operate. Unfortunately, the gist of Star Ruler, though, is that you still just end up sending Blob A against enemy Blob B, and you'll see which one was the better planned out in the beginning, rather than relying on intuitive controls from the player themselves. Alright, that pretty much covers our initial look here at StarDrive and comparison to Star Ruler 2. Altogether, from the time a few hours I've spent playing StarDrive 2, I'm kind of iffy about the price on it, really. I mean, $25 is not much for a game these days, but at the same time, I guess you could say I'm kind of a bit stingy, really. So, I'm sure as I adapt more to it and play it more, I will probably get to like it a lot more. But the lack of multiplayer is a huge disadvantage for me. I play with a number of people regularly, so games like Star Ruler are definitely preferable in that regards because they actually have multiplayer. And basically, if you're looking for a quicker 4X sci-fi game that has more player-controlled combat and doesn't rely so much on long-term, well, not really long-term strategies, but basically doesn't rely so much on complicated strategies like you end up with in Star Ruler 2, then StarDrive 2 is definitely a game that you'll want to get. Of course, if you want to play with anybody else, obviously it's not going to be the game you want. And if you like the more complex diplomacy that you have in Star Ruler 2, then it's definitely the game for you there. Espionage, definitely have to hand it to StarDrive 2. Ship design, both of them are really excellent systems, and I like that neither of them are like your typical 4X game where your ship design is just set, and a ship is a ship based on whatever class it is, and you don't get any options for it. I love the customization options. I personally prefer StarDrive 2's ship design just because it makes it fit the chassis, rather than giving you make an entire block of this kind of design. But they're both really good on that, and it's really hard to say which one goes in which favor. So really, you can't go wrong with either game at this point. Both of them are definitely worth playing, and definitely fun to play. You'll find out as you'll go through with the heroes and different side quests, I guess you would say, in StarDrive 2, that there's a lot more tongue-in-cheek humor in the game, while Star Ruler 2 is more of the typical space opera, no real comedy to it, basically. Alright, so that gives you guys my initial thoughts on StarDrive 2 in comparison to Star Ruler 2. Of course, I hope that was helpful and inspirational in some ways, and as always, thanks for watching.